Good afternoon, everyone. It is February 21st, 2024, and I call to order the Knox County Finance Committee meeting. If you will, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Lundy,
Here.
Commissioner Durrett,
Here.
Commissioner Oster, Commissioner Ward, Commissioner Schoonmaker,
Here.
Commissioner Hill, Commissioner Lee, Commissioner Beeler, Commissioner Daly, Commissioner Jay,
Here.
Commissioner Frazier.
Present.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum. Look for a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting on December 18th, 2023. Is there a motion?
Second.
There's a motion by Commissioner Daly, second by Ms. Hill. All in favor, please, or not, Ms. Frazier. Whew, it's one of those days already. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Is there anybody here from the public wishing to talk about the fabulous world of finance? Seeing none, we'll skip item number 4, and we will proceed right to a report from our Knox County Schools. Hello, Mr. Simons. How are you? You got to hit that little button there that lights you up red. The little speaker guy.
Ah, there we go.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
All right.
Okay.
If you would state your name and county of residence and title, please.
Chris Simons, Knox County Schools, Knox County, Director of Accounting.
Welcome, welcome. Commissioners, you have in the digital documents a summary sheet, and the floor is yours, sir.
All right, yeah, like Commissioner Jay said, Ron had sent out a financial summary and summary sheet there. Basically, we're on par with the prior year. I'll try to keep this pretty short. As far as you think halfway through the year, this is actual through 12/31. If you think the basis that we should look at, it should be around 50% right now. Local taxes are obviously, they're sitting at 40.4%. That'll catch up. There's only like 4 months of sales tax in those numbers. That's consistent with prior years. So obviously that'll catch up as we move on into the year. State of Tennessee is good, right on par where we think it should be. All other, a chunk of that, about 9 million of that is indirect costs. So that's dollars that we get from our grants. Our general purpose fund charges our grants. It's a state agreed upon rate. So as the year goes on, we will catch up that as well. Is there any questions on revenues? Seeing none. On expenditures, salaries and benefits, it looks behind on the surface, but a lot of our teachers and stuff, their contracts don't begin until August, so that's explaining that. That's right where we would expect it to be at this time. Moving down, supplies and materials is slightly higher. I think we talked about that last time. You know, at the beginning of school, that number is obviously going to be where the majority of the expenses are going to be spent. Debt on construction, that actually should be like capital outlay and debt on construction. Majority of that obviously is payments to Knox County Debt Service Fund to pay our portion of the debt. And then all other, that number is, it's mainly a lot of our charter school pass-through funds for our TISA funds, and it has insurance, workers' comp, those type things. We had over budgeted for charter school pass-through, so that's why that number is somewhat lower. Are there any questions on the expenditures for the comparative? Okay. So moving down, that's just kind of a high level of what I just spoke about, and comparing fiscal year 23 to that, and you can see we're right on par with where we were last year at this time. And on the summary sheet, again, it's very similar to what we saw last time, a couple months ago. You know, as far as we got a healthy fund balance, sales taxes we're cautiously optimistic on that. You know, it's November looked good. I haven't seen December yet. I'm sure Chris may talk about that. But November was better than we expected. As far as we're cautiously optimistic because you can see at the bottom of that sheet, there's trends to watch. You can see the comparison of sales tax year to date through 5 period or 5 points, data points. You can see it's significantly dropped off the growth. So that's kind of could be area of concern, things to watch. Obviously, as far as our main areas of concern is obviously, like we talked about last time again, the TISA, we want to get an idea of what that looks like. We've been told 0.5%, 1% increase, which is significantly lower than what we got this prior year. So obviously we live off that growth. And then obviously the federal ESSER dollars that ends in September of '24. We have strategic teams that are looking at all these initiatives and daily keeping up with these dollars. And if this initiative if we lose this initiative, should general purpose pick this up in the following years? So there's a strategic team that's constantly looking at these items and seeing if it's worth being absorbed. So
Can I ask you a question on the TISA funding? Have you all projected out where I think it was either last year or the year before budget cycle, there was a mandate from the state to get all teachers up to $50,000 salary or higher, and where you all are in that process and where your TISA funding is going to level out? Because the first year of TISA was pretty robust, but if you're telling us it's going to be maybe 1% or 2%, are you, given that salaries are your biggest expenditure across the board, have you guys modeled that out to better understand what the local, portion's going to have to be to make that mandate happen?
yeah, I think Superintendent Roswick, obviously we have to meet that threshold, but our budget team has been looking at that. I don't have anything to speak on right now, but I do know that is definitely something that's on our radar as far as, the concern with sales tax, the growth, and then also on top of that, the TISA dollars, getting minimal growth. Like, how are we going to get there? And I know we're operating basically on a zero-based budget. I mean, he's really, and that word gets thrown around very loosely, but this year, I'm not in as many of the budget meetings, but I've certainly heard way more as far as, all departments, schools are looking at, they have to basically give an explanation for each line item and whether it's truly needed. So I feel like this year has been very, they're really getting into the weeds on this stuff, which is good, obviously, because we're going to have to do something to.
I would love for you to, at the next finance committee, bring some sort of modeling report about that particular thing, because I don't think we all understand the financial impact it's going to have, having state mandating something, but having less money coming from the state to supply or to support the mandate.
Correct.
So if
Okay.
you could do that, that'd be great.
Be glad to. Other questions?
Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You stole my question, actually,
sorry.
so thanks for that. You mentioned that you're not included in the budget meetings. Who is included in the budget meetings, and when do those occur?
They're at least weekly, but they're going into communities, they're going into departments, and each department's, meeting with our budget team, and then also the communities giving their inputs as well. I'd be glad to have the budget team reach out and
I'm
just
just
kind of
wondering-
give some.
Yeah, how often leadership meets with finance and discusses budgets, and who's included in those conversations and when they occur?
Yeah, I know it's very frequently. I can't really, because like I said, I'm not as involved. I'm more on the actual side, but I definitely will have our budget team or Ron, our CFO, reach out regarding
Thank you.
how often they meet.
Any other questions for Mr. Simons, or any other information you want to review?
That's my question.
You good?
Good. Yep.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you
you
all.
very much, appreciate it. Next up, we'll welcome our team from the trustees' office. And who's presenting to us today? If you'll join us at the podium, please state your name and title and county residence, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Pearl Mathis, Knox County, and I am the CFO in the trustee's office.
Excellent, the floor is yours.
Okay. excuse me. On our favorable items, remain in high in collections. We're actually over last year by 3.8 million on the taxes, and we received probably the final payment from CoreLogic, and it was over 3 million at that time. So we are still receiving extremely high interest rate on our depository account. And what we have on that is with First Bank. We have what we call a central concentrated balance we maintain on there, but the funds are swept overnight into a sweep account, and we are earning 5.65%. That's prime plus 15 basis points. So as of tax season, when we started September, we have to this date earned $4,403,371.90, and that's on depository account alone. That's not on the investment accounts. So that is very positive, and we're holding our breath until the rate goes down.
A quick question, Mr. Chairman. So that was from July 1 through December 31st?
Actually, September through January.
And it was 4 million and,
Yeah, 4,000,004.
thank you.
Okay, now, we did transfer funds of 250,000 into like a money market account at Smart Bank. We did that in September, but as of this date, we have also transferred another 25 million over there because they are paying us prime, 5.50 on the depository account. And so it's not anything that's locked in, and it's, cash liquid if we should need it. So that's a positive move too. Still anticipating rates going down, prime rate, but we're trying to maintain deposits right now at the higher rate. And you'll see on here, we did invest some money at 4.71, but that at this time for a long-term, 3 years, 4.7 is a good rate because the longer you go out, the lower rates go down. So that's a good thing at this time. It may look difficult to see taking a lower rate because of what we're getting on deposit, but that's for assurance for
Is that a
down the road.
4.71 guaranteed?
Yes.
Okay.
Guaranteed. It is a locked-in rate on that. And the bank account balances, as you all have a printout, comparison for the last 6 years for the months, I think through December. You could have that at hand. And also, there's should be a property tax levy and the collections report attached to that. And we are doing very well on collections. Now, the unfavorable is the retail and food service, and they're still struggling to make a profit, but we have not had, which is a good thing, any new bankruptcies. So we are watching those things, and that's why that investment that was done at 4.7 at this point is a good investment. It's a good rate on that. So, and we are continuing to watch the market to make sure that we continue to get the best possible rates on any investments before they start to drop. Any questions?
Any questions for the trustee's office? Okay, thank you very much for the report.
Okay, and one other
Yes,
thing, I
ma'am.
don't know if Chris is going to report on it, he may be. Some of the funds that we have on our list are actually community development money, the ARPA money that come in, and we have some of that on investments and on depository account. That's what we have on there. But the actual investment is with Raymond James, and the anticipated amount of interest on that for this year's $1,061,000.
Is that it's at the bottom of page 1 on the 6-year comparison. Is that the 68,940,000?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, there's 68 was on there, but this is, they have in there 68,134, I think it is. Okay, but that's the one, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, the ARPA account. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate the report. Next up, we'll spend some time with our finance director, Mr. Caldwell. The floor is yours, sir. And you have also sent us both a one-pager, but also a pretty robust financial report. If you would state your name and department and county of residence.
Chris Caldwell, Department of Finance. We'll start with the one pager and then touch a little bit inside the monthly financial update. And I'll briefly touch on some highlights from our ACFR that ended June the 30th, 2023. And then I've got some items of interest as well, and then we'll answer all your questions. We'll start with the one pager, as I said. So the first piece that we'll talk about is operating funds related from July of 23 through December of 23. So for that, those operating funds, revenues about $463.6 million compared to a year ago of about $429 million. So about a $34.5 million increase or a positive variance on revenue year over year. Expenditures for 48.6 compared to 396.7, so about 51.9 million more in expenses than a year ago. So if you look at the increase in revenue of 34.5 million compared to the increase in expenses, that's about a $17.4 million deficit compared to a year ago, right? So expenses are much higher than revenue growth. The majority of that revenue growth is related to TISA dollars that Chris talked about. There's some things in there. Pearl had mentioned bank interest through, in my report, which was July through November, bank interest was up 2.8 million year over year. And so there's a few things that lead to this negative variance of expenses being higher than revenue, FY24 compared to FY23. You can see year over year that revenues exceeded expenditures in 23 through this time frame by 32.4 million. This year, that number is still to the positive, but it's right at 15 million. So there's a few things that will lead to that we can talk through. And stop me at any time if you have questions. I don't mind having.
Are you going to come back to the expenditures in the detail report?
We can.
Or do you
It's
wanna-
perfectly fine.
Okay.
So we'll go on down a little bit and look at local option sales tax from July through January. We did receive February's report this week. We've not got that worked up yet. It was higher than the previous February, which is actually for December sales, and we'll just have to see what makes that up. But the important part on here is July through January. You will see that the variance for general fund and engineering and public works are basically flat, while schools is showing a positive variance compared to the composite projection of about 9.3 million. The majority of that growth for schools is coming from sales tax collected within the city and the town of Farragut. But the funds that's related to the county are fairly flat as it relates to sales tax. You'll notice that the next thing down through there, percentage of property tax collected through December, something that we look was 54.34%, which is a little less than what it was a year ago. Pearl had touched on this. One of the big things that we have been waiting on and the trustee's office has been working on was there was a $3 million escrow payment from CoreLogic that was posted and booked in our books last year in December that I think is being posted this year in February. So it makes those comparisons a little unstaggered, so to speak. And so it looks like we're down, but we knew what that payment was, but CoreLogic was having trouble with their fields to get that turned into us. And so that at the end of February, I think we'll get back to an apples to apples comparison. Positive trends, hotel motel tax continues to be up. It's up 11.1% from July through January. While we have saw a flattening of revenue sources, that is one that hasn't flattened. And so That's a positive thing. Interest and penalty was up 5% from September through January, so that's just collections from the trustee's office as it relates to delinquent taxes, which collect the interest and penalty. We mentioned the bank and interest earned being up by 2.8 million. Stable trends, current property taxes are flat compared to FY '23, September through January. That's, of course, without the $3 million escrow payment from CoreLogic, and so we'll see how that does once we get through February. Sales tax collections have flattened the last 3 months. Gasoline tax collections are up a whopping 0.6% over last year, July through January. So basically flat on gasoline tax. Negative trends, the wheel tax revenue is down about 6.68% July through December. Questions on that page before I go to the monthly financial update?
Commissioner Frazier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Caldwell. Just a couple of questions. The increased expenses, how is that anticipated to play out as we continue to see kind of normalized revenues? And what will that look like for our road improvement plans and our Parks and Recs improvement plans?
Yes, I think that's a good question. I think this, so what leads to our increased expenses? A few things. Raises from a year ago, you'll remember that we did a pretty substantial raise for the sheriff's office, right? And really a more than average raise for county employees of 5%. And so those things lead to increased expenses. So that is one reason in the general fund and other funds that you will see increased expenses. Other thing is this, and the sheriff talked about this maybe last month or the month before last. Because of those increases in pay, his vacancy rate went from 88 at the corrections facility down to 4, right? So, okay, we're all happy that we're filling vacancies, except me over here saying typically we have vacancies, which then don't report that. I mean, you know, we ultimately have some of those vacancies that lead us not to spend the totality of our budget. So when what we're having is increased pay, which is increased benefits as well, and then a retention rate and fewer vacant positions, which are leading to higher expenses. We typically spend 96 to 97% of our budget, and we budget as though we're going to spend 100%. We will put a small amount of a negative allocation in our non-departmental account to account for some of those, but we have far exceeded that in the past few years. That's what leads to higher expenses, are those things like that. And so it's not a negative thing, it's just what is driving, when you look at this report, you're seeing a flattening of revenue. So what is happening was we're closing that gap, right? So last year, and we'll get into this, last year revenues exceeded expenses by a pretty good gap. That gap's going to shrink, and while that's not a bad thing, what that will do is it will limit us at the end of the year when we go through designations and everybody says, how are we doing? Can I request some money? You know, things like that. Those will tend to shrink because that gap's going to shrink.
So it will impact any future infrastructure improvements that we may need.
So yes, and so let's talk about that a little bit. You heard me say that gasoline tax is flat. You heard me say that engineering sales tax is flat, right? Those are the two revenue sources for engineering and public works. That's where the paving budget lies as an operating expense. And so if revenues aren't increasing, what's not going to increase, right? So I don't know how we can increase the paving budget without increases in those revenue sources, and we're not seeing those increases.
So are we possibly looking at not adding any road improvement projects in addition to those that are already slated in the capital
I
improvement
think
plan or
so.
the road improvement
Yeah,
plan?
so let's go from operations to CIP for a second, so capital improvement plan. Whether it's engineering, capital improvement, or Parks and Rec, or even schools, right? So schools capital projects fund. We have saw, as interest rates rise, it's positive from the bank interest standpoint, right? But we're going to talk about this in a minute. We're about to go ahead and get you all to approve the issuance of the FY '24 bonds for the FY '24 capital plan you all approved. We will issue 20-year fixed-rate bonds. That rate right now is setting around 4%, right? Chris will tell you that our fixed-rate debt from 2 years ago was probably 2.5%. So what happens with that increased interest rate? It really can limit your projects that you do or anything, because you're going to be paying more in interest than you used to be paying. And so that's something that we're monitoring is interest rate, because it is going to be higher. And what else has changed is this. The last 4, 5, or 6 years, you've heard me say, by the way, we've issued bonds and we got $6, $8, $9, $10 million of premium on those bonds, meaning we could take that money and do projects. Higher interest rates, premiums are going down, right? And so we won't see the amount of premium that we've had, nor will we be able to take advantage of low interest rates. So I think fixed rate around 4%. We typically would budget 5% on variable rate debt, and we're paying above 4% now. So all those things lead us to probably seeing not only an operating budget, but a capital improvement plan fairly flat, right? I would prefer to have lower rates and being able to put that toward projects, but what we're going to end up doing is paying it toward interest. And so, until interest rates drop, and then we'll see what that is and when that is.
Yeah, the hotel motel tax revenue is up, so what is contributing to that?
Hotel, so that's really good, right? So 11% increase in hotel motel tax. A lot of that increase is due to average daily rate increasing. So basically, hotels are charging a higher rate, thus it's making our revenue better. It may not be more visitors per se, but it's a higher daily rate that's driving that.
And then the proposed legislation to increase the frequency of property appraisals, how will that impact our revenues?
That's intriguing. And so here's what happens. So comptroller says we want to increase reappraisals from every 4, 5, or 6 years to every 2, 3, or 4 years, right? And so it's, I always get asked this question. Why does that matter? Because reappraisal is net neutral, right, as it relates to reappraisal. You can't make money during reappraisal except off new construction. So how can that have an impact on revenues? Because what we're hearing is that counties across the state are leaving a lot of revenue on the table. Here's the key to that. They have to do a sales ratio study every year, right, that basically says what homes are sold for versus what they're appraised at, and they're giving a percentage. The state wants that percentage to be 90% or above. Some of them are in the 60s, right? And so how does that impact? So businesses and utilities, so let's take like our KUB payment, right? They get a discount based off that ratio, and businesses can get a discount based off that ratio. So if you're not staying at your ratio above 90% or more, then that's how the state is saying, as communities, we're leaving money on the table. It's based off the ratio. It is complex, it is kind of convoluted, but like, we know that through reappraisal, that KUB's payment in lieu of taxes went down like $800,000. Most of that is driven not only, some of it is by depreciation, but it's also by whatever the sales ratio is. State wants that ratio to be 90% or higher, and the way you get there, they think, is more frequent reappraisals, which will mean that you're doing it more often, which should keep you above. The longer you wait, they think, then the more apt you are to have a bigger gap in that sales ratio. I will say this, it will probably mean that assessors from across the state will want more staff to be able to do more reappraisals, right? But if it results in more revenue, then it can pay for itself more.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question on that topic. If that were to pass through this year legislatively, and you would have, each county would have an option to do a 2, 3, or 4-year cycle, is that decision solely made by the property assessor?
I think the assessor brings that to county commission. And so then there is a vote by county commission.
Is there a timeline built into that or into that legislative action to say if it's passed on a state level, then the commission has to decide by June 30?
My assumption would be, and I've not read it, and I'm far from an attorney. My thought would be they would probably try to give you a lead time, because if you're in the middle of a reappraisal, they're probably going to give you some time to figure that out. But I think ultimately what they're going to say is this takes in effect maybe July 1, so the latest you could go was 4 years from July 1. That's just my thoughts. We'll see what it is.
Okay, I'm going to ask our head of legislative affairs, Mr. Schoonmaker, to just monitor that, and so we can talk about it. And I think that in our future finance committee meetings, depending on the timing of the legislation, we may need to hear from our property assessor, have a presentation from our property assessor to this finance committee about what those options would look like if we did a 2, 3, or 4, how that might change and affect our financial status. So, Commissioner Schoonmaker, if you'll kind of keep an eye on that, and we can work together or if you know off the top of your head, then tell us right now. Because I know you just came from Nashville like we all did.
Yes, and actually it was deferred in the Senate State and Local Committee till next week. But on the bill itself, they have not put when the effective date is. So I think once it passes, then they'll add an amendment that says effective maybe July 1st of, 25 or something. But normally a bill at the bottom will also say, as you know, effective date, July 1.
What year are we in now on our,
We would be in
I mean, when would our next appraisal be on our next schedule? And you might have a
So-
team from the back of the trustee's office that might know.
Yeah, so we're currently on a 4 or 5 year schedule. 4?
So our
and so-
next reappraisal would be
Probably 3 years away, because we just went through reappraisal,
26,
right?
right?
Probably so.
2020.
So the question is, I think, if, assuming that this gets approved by the General Assembly, does our assessor want to move that up sooner than 26, or does he or she want to continue to do 26 and then go to a schedule sooner after that? It's a good question.
Okay, I'm going to add that to the future.
I would defer to them
agenda.
on what they think that they're capable of doing.
And in the committee, the biggest roadblock now is that the fiscal note on that is saying that the taxpayers would have a $100 million burden, which I think goes back to the sales ratio. If you're at a 60% sales ratio and you're going to a 90% sales ratio, that's how that number keeps going. But none of the senators yesterday morning wanted to vote for a $100 million tax increase.
Sure.
So I think they're going to have to work that out to figure out and explain to everybody it's not a tax increase, it's just getting everybody to the 90% threshold.
Correct. I think that's the key, and I think it is hard to explain, right? Because people hear reappraisal and think you got to be net neutral, which you do. It really has to do with that sales ratio.
I have a question going back before you dive into the bigger report, and this is following up on Ms. Frazier's inquiry. If revenues are flat, local and state, you've told us time and again, the state has said everybody expect to be flat, and it seems like they're flat locally at best, and expenses keep rising. We're fast approaching budget season, and you're already in the middle of figuring that out. Is the executive branch considering any revenue models that are not like, have any new revenue models or anything different than what's been done before, or is it going forward status quo and stay flat and hold on until the next whatever?
I think really for us, right, and we can touch on it when we get to the annual report, we've got, although revenues will flatten out, we've got some room that will allow us to grow into that over the next year or so to see what happens. And so I don't think you will see per se like any new revenue sources proposed. It'll just be growing into what we've already got, and basically the budget surplus that we've experienced in the past will just continue to go away, so to speak.
So budget for more capital improvements, other things that are needed from the county, other expenses that are continuing to rise, and get that budget cheer up instead of more conservative with a bigger surplus at the end.
Ultimately, I think, but in the first, the part that we'll have to monitor too, right? So as one of the things that's leading to this increase, like when we get to the summary schedule, is going to show like a $4.1 million increase in revenue in the general fund year over year. That's true. 2.8 of that is bank interest earned, okay?
Which
So-
will go away at some point soon.
That's my point. So that's going to go away. But if everything else is flat, I think it gives us a chance to grow our expenses at a typical rate, and we can get to a point to where we'll be fine. We've got, you've heard me say this, we've got healthy reserves, not that we're looking to spend those, but they're healthy. And from a budgetary standpoint, how we budget, we can slowly increase our expenses by reducing the amount of designations that we'll have to end the year.
Do you anticipate a time in the coming years when our expenses are outpacing our revenues to a point where we need to use bonded debt to operate Knox County government?
No, I don't think so. I think for us, right, it's, if inflation settles down, right, and then that puts us in a better spot, and if we get back to what I would say is normal growth, right, not what we saw the last 4 or 5 years, but normal growth of 1.5% to 2% growth on property tax, growth on sales tax. It leads us the ability to manage within our means, so to speak.
All right, do you want to dive into the summary?
Yeah, so
or
we'll go to
into the
page-
detailed report?
Yep. Page 4 on the monthly financial update, I just talked about, and this is really on the first line of general fund, you'll see that year-to-date column on the far right, and you'll see under the general fund, a $4.1 million increase year over year for the 6 months, right, of 4.1 million. 2.8 of that is interest earned, right? And so to what Chairman Jay said, we know that as interest rates will drop in the near future, that number goes away, so that's a number that we can't count on. So I say that to say if you take that off, you see a really flattening of revenue. You go down to general purpose school fund, you'll see that revenue grew by about 34.1 million. The bulk of that is TISA funding. They have still, they've seen growth in their sales tax, but the majority of their growth is TISA. On the expense side, you see on the general fund that 8.1 million growth in expenses, and on the school side, $43 million growth in expenses. So that's where we got to that $17 million figure that we discussed earlier. Can
I ask you a quick question? I'm just on this first summary page. this is our budget. Obviously, it's not the year-to-date actual, but it's trending pretty close. Our budgeted revenue versus expenditures is about 28 million underwater, in the negative, but our year-to-date actual is just slightly higher. Do you, when you're seeing the trend of the first half of the year, does it concern you that we're gonna spend more than we bring in, or is it gonna end up being pretty leveled out?
So what were you looking at? What'd you say first? I'm trying to find that.
I'm on the page 4 of your.
Yep.
You've got revenues at 1 million, or 1,012,000,000, and you've got expenditures budgeted at 1,040,000,000. So that's a negative 28. But when you look at the next column of the year-to-date, our revenues are just slightly above our expenditures, and I'm just wondering if, we essentially approved a negative budget, but yet we're hoping to end up in a positive atmosphere come July 30, or July 1, correct?
So ultimately, that's not quote-unquote the adopted budget. That is the revised budget that include designations and things like that. So it's always going to show higher expenses than revenue. So basically, the 28 million in that expenditure line are designations that we've approved or schools have approved that have been revenue that's over collected from a previous year that we're going to expend this year,
Okay, so the
right?
pass-through, okay.
Correct.
So, but even on the expense side right now, we're still pretty close, but I guess the ultimate question comes, are you projecting out, maybe we'll see this in following slides, but are you projecting out that it'll come
Yeah.
very close to even at the end?
I think so, because ultimately on the revenue side here, although we're showing a 6-month schedule, most of our revenue is collected in arrears. So a lot of this is 4 months of revenue while we're looking at 6 months of expenses, because property taxes, we don't start.
It
to
does sort of
collect.
a hockey curve back towards the
Correct.
springtime, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Everything else back through there that we kind of have covered on the summary page, I want to touch on an item, and then I'll take any questions that you may have. I had a reporter come and see me today and wanted to talk to me about the sales tax on legislation, this sales tax on groceries legislation, where the General Assembly is giving us the ability to lower sales tax on food. And is the county going to do that? And so I said this, and I would say this to you all, and we just came from TCSA, right? And so some of you know this, but and when I explain this, I think it makes more sense. He said, so is the county going to lower sales tax on food? I said, well, you see, here's the problem. While the state may be giving us the ability to lower sales tax on food, the state also has a maintenance of effort as it relates to school funding, right? We, because of a referendum in the 60s, give 72% of sales tax 72% of local option sales tax collected by the county and the city goes to schools, right? And so if we lowered our sales tax on food, right, and we don't meet that maintenance of effort, what's the state going to do? They're going to take more sales tax from us because we are not meeting our obligation of sales tax on food. Our obligation of maintenance of effort. And so I said, I believe that the majority of counties across, and I said, listen, City of Knoxville is in this same boat with us on sales tax on food. They give so much money to the schools that if we make them not hit their maintenance of effort, then they're in violation. So it's hard for us to do that. Ultimately, too, we have a ballot referendum from, I think it's 65, that dictates that the first 1% goes to schools, and that's how you get to 72%. So while the General Assembly is very nice in giving us the option, if it were to pass, everybody in the state, the ability to lower sales tax on food, when you have a maintenance of effort on education, and the state mandates that the first 50% of sales tax goes to education, right? We do more of it because of a ballot referendum. Furthermore, the governor has a mandate that we talked about a minute ago, that we got to get teacher salaries to 50,000 by 2026. So, this reporter was like, I'm going up to Market Square to talk to people after I'm done with you. I said, they're all going to tell you, of course, they're for this. I mean, it's easy, right? But it's not easy when you think about, you've got to have, if you don't hit maintenance of effort, then the state has the ability to penalize you. And so I think this report, there was a reporter in Rutherford County did this, talked to their government. They basically said, we can't do this, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to ask Commissioner Schoonmaker, this is a great example of how the state, somebody works on a bill for essentially one county that might have a ripple effect across the state. Could you provide the context?
Yeah, what we're talking about, I'm sorry, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we're talking about is Senate Bill 2520. And initially, the Tennessee County Commissioners Association voted to oppose this legislation. Well, as of Monday, now we've gotten really what is the legislative intent. And it's really based on trying to assist the rural counties that border the state of Kentucky, because Kentucky does not charge sales tax on food or food ingredients. And so what's happening is, for these rural counties, is the Tennessee consumer is driving across the border to save the sales tax. And of course, if you're now with the price of groceries, if you're buying a couple $100s a week, that can be a substantial amount of money. So what the state is saying is, we're still going to collect our 4% sales tax, but if your entity wants to drop the 2.75 down to 1.5 or whatever it is for your local option tax, you can do that. So it really is not something that would have statewide application at this point, because we're not competing with other counties where someone has no food sales tax and somebody else does. So, but initially they should have just, here again, it goes back to the way the caption bill is listed. It should say, for those counties who border, say, Tennessee, because they did the same deal for Sullivan County, when people were driving from Bristol, Tennessee over to Bristol, Virginia to buy groceries because it was cheaper. And they made a deal back then, a couple of years ago, to allow that county to make an adjustment. So, but yeah, just based on what you're saying, most of the counties are not going to be able to afford to give up 50 cents on the dollar of tax collected that would go to the schools, and then have to find an additional funding
Revenue source.
resource.
Correct.
So then you're back to possibly raising property taxes.
Correct, exactly
So-
right. And I think that's what I said as well. I mean, if you're a border county, it makes sense. Now, what you would probably want to do if you're a border county is do a study and try to find a sweet spot, right? Because maybe you think, I'm not collecting any sales tax on groceries or food items. But if you are having some and you take it all away and you don't have a lot of growth, then you could find yourself not meeting maintenance of effort. So I think even for them, they got to find a sweet spot.
Right.
But how this bill is written, I think it's making our friends in the media just say, so you're going to give this away? And I think it's going to put everybody in kind of a bad spot, because of course the general public's going to say, of course I wish it would go down, without knowing we actually have statutes and state laws in place that make us meet maintenance of effort, right? I mean, we have maintenance of effort on schools, engineering and public works, which get sales tax, right? the sheriff, public library. So you think about those things that would get sales tax that has that impact on us, that if we're not hitting those, it can challenge us. And so I'm glad, you're right. I think the intent, I was in a meeting with a mayor from a border county, and he said this would help us.
Yeah.
And everybody else was in the room was like, who are you? You know,
Well, and it's also kind of a ripple effect because those Tennessee counties where the local mom and pop grocery store is losing business, so they're not
Correct.
able to hire as many employees and stock as much food, and it's a whole cycle. So if you can kind of level the playing field, it makes a lot of sense. But, you know, I can never see like a Rutherford County or a Williamson County or to do anything like that.
yeah, it's tough. I'm going
Thank you.
to dive into the ACFR. So if you want to watch me tonight on TV, I'll be on TV at some point. Not that you want to see me, but the ACFR that we finished for FY '23, I'm just going to go over some highlights so you'll know. We have mainly been through this before, although it was unaudited. Now that our friends at Pew have audited this and Ted's watching, then it makes it all great, just so you're aware. The primary government's change in net position for the year was about 13.3 million, meaning that our total, as a total government, our revenue exceeded our expenses by that amount of money. Fund balances increased to a total of 203.6 million, which is an increase of 29.6 million. The majority of that is in general purpose school fund.
What page are you referring to right now? I just
Well,
want
I'm in the ACFR and I'm on Roman numeral page 17. It's under the MD&A. Perry would tell you that if you want to go home and read this at night, it'll make you smarter.
I don't think that was put on our digital agenda.
It may not be. It may not
That's
be
right.
on you. So
Okay.
I'm just going to read these things to you, and 'cause I'm going to go over this a little bit tomorrow at audit committee. So,
Will you send out a copy of that to the finance committee here
Perry,
afterwards?
we will.
Thank you.
To make sure. So general fund, our fund balance increased from 2022 to 2023 from about 101.2 million to 110.2 million, about a $9 million increase. The unassigned piece went up about 3 of that, so 3 of the 9 was unassigned, which is what we pay attention to. Some interesting things, rates of return on our defined benefit plans for FY '23. So the closed county DB plan had a rate of return of 8.02%. Just so you're aware, the discount rate for the county plan is 6.5. The UOP, the closed UOP DB plan had a rate of return of 10.05%. Its discount rate is 7%. And the teacher's DB plan, which is also closed, got a rate of return of 9.27%. And its discount rate is 6.75%. So all 3 of our closed DB plans outpaced their discount rate, which is positive. The current, at the end of FY '23, the current pension, the net pension liability on the county DB plans about 27 million, on the teachers' plans about 15.7 million, and on the UOP plans about 146.2 million. So to give you an idea of something that we talked about a little bit about revenues and expenses, let's just talk about general fund in '23. General fund in '23, we had revenue of about 225 total, so revenue of 225 million, which far exceeds what we had budgeted, right? Expenses, though, were about 220. Now, you say, Chris, you said that we had a lot of room there. Of the 220, 19.7 million that are transfers to other funds. And so what does that mean? So ultimately, what we will do at the end of a fiscal year is we'll shore up some of our funds that are negative, right? Solid waste being one, golf course, some things like that, right? But then what we'll also do, like in a year like this, if there are some capital projects that we want to fund with cash, we'll transfer that to public improvement. So instead of paying for it with bonds, we can pay for it with cash and not pay interest. And so a lot of things that we will do in transfers to end the year will be to things that we may want to pay cash for. So point being, we do have more room there than it would appear just because of transfers. But we do know that we will have higher expenses this year. Debt service fund, you'll remember that during the year in debt service that we terminated our swaps. You may remember terminating swaps. You all voted for that. We thank you for that. It cost about $9 million to terminate those swaps, but it will pay for itself long-term. But so we expected to see a $9 million decrease in fund balance at the end of '23 for the debt service fund. It ended up being about $2.3 million. So debt service fund exceeded what we anticipated. Why would that be? We budget about 5% for a variable rate debt. So for part of '23, we were paying lower. It did increase at the end. So in the future, we do expect our interest on our bonds, on our variable rate debt to increase because of interest rates where they are currently.
I have a question about, I was asked by a constituent recently about debt. And we know the numbers, I mean, it's in our reports here of what we spend on debt service every year and our total debt that we hold. But what is our debt liability? Is your office able to provide us a report of, I can't remember the number, I think it's in the 800 million, correct?
On this report,
Where is it here in the?
so on the report, under MD&A, which that Perry encourages you to read, on Roman numeral
Oh, you're
page
in the
17.
ACFR. We don't have that in
It's
front of
okay.
us.
I'll just tell you, the total bonded debt at the end of the year was 727.4 total million. That's an increase of 3.6% compared to the prior year, which was like 701.9 million.
But in that 727, I mean, what is our debt liability, interest, principal, et cetera, looking out over the life of all of our debt?
Okay, so that what I'm giving you now is principal only. There is a schedule that shows both. You said what now? Oh, in the notes, Perry? Okay. I was going.
As you find that, for commissioners, I was recently going over our budget with a couple of constituents, and I think everybody's continued to be amazed that our third largest line item in our budget is debt service at $80 million a year. And not only is the factor how much debt we hold as principal only, but what is our overall liability in the total mortgage we're going to pay for the next, I don't know what is everything based on a 20-year or 30-year?
Well,
Or is it a little bit of everything?
no, we have the last 10 years or so only did 20-year bonds. We do have some bonds prior to that were a 28-year bond that is continuing to be paid. I think it gets paid off in 2033, I want to think. But so to answer your question, the principal amount at the end of FY '23 was $727.4 million. Interest on those bonds is anticipated to be $219.2. So the total with everything is $946.6.
So 946.6 is our total liability.
That would be, yes. And that's like, that variable rate debt is based off calculations. So it could be lower, it could be higher.
Could be higher,
yeah.
but essentially, we have about $1 billion of debt obligation in this county on a $1
Correct.
billion annual budget.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, what we typically do is we will issue fixed rate 20-year bonds. We do have some variable rate that will expire in 2029 and then some in 2034. But you know, I think ultimately for us, what we tried to do is we strive for level debt service payments, so we don't have a big ebbs and flows, right? And so that's what you'll see. And then, you know, we know what our capability of is to pay. So as we prepare a 5-year capital improvement plan, we'll always try to be cognizant of what levels we can go to. And we also have a fairly healthy fund balance in debt service payments and debt service fund that allow us to have a cushion as it relates to certain debt service items. The final thing, let me see here. Where's back here? So, general purpose school fund at the end of FY '23, as we mentioned, increased their fund balance by $21.4 million. And so they ended their fund balance with about 113.8, which I think, Chris, is about 12%. So 12%, JFOA recommends 10%, state recommends 3%, but I think we try to go by GFOA averages.
And didn't they want to keep a buffer, you know, state sort of says 10 is your mark. They're obviously doing better than that, but given that state is unpredictable at best going
Yeah.
forward financially, to sort of keep that in the hopper instead of trying to use it as a, you know, reallocate it right now.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt, schools or us, right? So we have like the schools, we have a fund balance policy that's a little higher than even what GFOA recommends, and we exceed that currently. We know that we're not quite as high as what AAA counties are, that typically, they usually have 5 months worth of reserves or so. We recommend, for us in the general fund, the GFOA recommends 2 months. Our policy says 3 months, and I think we got a little over 4 months. And like I said, with the school, state recommends 3%, GFOA says 10%, and they're at 12. And so, but, you know, that can be used to pay for one-time expenses when they hit and give some flexibility for things like that. Questions?
Anybody have any other questions on the detailed report, on the top sheet summary, anything else? Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. I know this is not a big revenue source for Knox County, but on the mineral severance tax for, say, the last 6 months, has it been what you thought it was, just kind of flat, or more than expected?
I don't have an exact number for you.
Yeah, I know.
But it's a little higher than it was last year. Of course, as you know, it's paid quarterly, so I think we've got 2 payments so far, and it's a few percent ahead of where it was a year ago.
Okay, well, that's good, because that money goes directly to the
Paving.
road
Yeah.
paving budget, so.
Correct.
That's great.
It does help.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from commissioners for Director Caldwell? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I do want to ask, Ms. Mathis, is she still here? Oh, she had to leave. You're with the trustee's office. Could you join us at the podium real quick? Just state your name and what department.
Linda McGinnis, and I work in the legal division in the trustee's office doing collections.
Okay, I will send a message to the trustee, but just to say it out loud here in the committee, several meetings ago for both commission and the finance committee, talked about the adjustment we made on the property tax freeze for our seniors.
Yes.
And I believe the trustee we had asked, what were the projections? How many people are using the system now, or using the program now? How many do we expect to use it later? And then what is the financial impact to the county? And we haven't gotten that information back, but I'm going to send a request for our May 13th meeting.
Okay.
All the property taxes should be collected at that point, and assuming new people will have been registered for that program, I think it's relevant to understand, are people using the program or not, and what is the financial impact if we freeze X percentage more of property taxes for people?
And they are absolutely using the program. We get phone calls. Right now, our phones are ringing off the walls because we just sent out about 60,000 tax notices for people who hadn't sent in their payments. But we also sent out reminders to all of the tax relief and tax freeze individuals for the ones that have not paid or sent in their paperwork.
Okay.
But they do have until April 1.
Okay, so May 13 should be timed, so I'll send a formal request
Okay.
to add that to the May agenda.
Okay?
Thank you. Commissioners, our next meeting is May 13th. That will be right in the heart of budget season. Is there we always leave time in this committee to see, are there any other deep dive financial issues, whether it be taxes or debt or expenditures or how we spend our money? Is there any topic that anybody has on top of their mind about that they want to prep for for the next meeting that add to the, and I mean, it could be something we talked about before, but you might want to talk about again, Commissioner Frazier, with a look on her face.
I guess, creative sources of revenue. I mean, I'm really, really concerned. I mean, I've just pulled up kind of the Hardin Valley Traffic Mobility Study that was completed in 2019, and there was for a 5, 10, and 20-year horizon, I didn't even get through half of the list, and they identified just the half of the list, $80 million of needed road improvements for development in 2019. And the annual engineering budget is $25 million. I mean,
I think it's less now, but yes,
yeah.
insufficient.
So, yeah, if you want to put a topic of discussion of additional revenue sources and how we get there, I think that's a conversation we're going to have. I mean, we can't tell our constituents that have long paid into the tax base, and we continue to ignore the condition of their road. I don't know what to say to my constituents.
Okay. Did you have Commissioner Schoonmaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the years, we've discussed the possibility, because we're the Finance Committee, of bringing in the different departments and having them explain their budgets to us. Most counties in Tennessee, the commissioners get actually a budget presentation from each department. But because we have a professional staff, we acquiesce that to them. But we have talked about it in the past. I don't know if we need to do that before there's a budget vote taken, but if you wanted to have specific departments come in and explain why they need X number of dollars for their department.
Anybody have any thoughts on that? Don't put
Carson said.
Carson?
Oh,
Okay, sorry, he was pointing over there. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Caldwell? Of how do you all how do you all receive budget requests and go through them with departments? And is there an efficient way that this committee or the committee members could be part of that understanding before it gets to us in a final form, because we don't ever really see it until we get to the end of the budget game.
So, yeah, typically what we would do is take budget requests from departments. In a normal year, we would say early January, you have until mid-February to turn in your budget request. And similar on capital. This year, we told them no need to turn in a budget request. Revenues are flat, so we'll handle your budget request. If you have any special requests or needs that we're not aware of, let us know, and so we can consider them. We did take capital budget requests, and so we go through those as well. And so we typically have budget meetings with departments, whether they turn in a budget request or not, just to make sure that we're not forgetting something. And so I think there are certain times when there are growth that it's good to meet with departments to see what they need ahead of time and let them make requests. This year, knowing what the state was projecting, we didn't think there was any. What I said is, I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want you to waste mine either. And so, no need to make requests. And so, and we have gotten, so they have, will let us know, yeah, but don't forget this contract increases and things like that, which we get and we understand. And so, but I think as we were preparing for a flat budget, no use in wasting anybody's time to preparing it. Because they're going to ask for more than what they currently have. They're never going to ask for less.
Any other topics anybody wants to add to the next Finance Committee meeting? Okay, our next meeting, any new business for today? Our next meeting is on May 13th, 2:00 p.m., same location and same bat channel. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.